Merci, Daniel and Sebastian. So I'm going to invite my panelists to come directly to their podium positions. I can see Jordan is ready, Despina. Here comes David as well, and Benoît. Super. Seats wherever you wish. Yep. Okay. Thanks very much, Sebastian. And thanks, Daniel, for your lovely welcome. And congratulations to PSG. We were all delighted. Not really, but anyway, we'll see. Congratulations for the great city of Paris. So we're starting with a heavy topic. How can Western defense stand in this new international dynamic? My name is Dara Murphy. I'm a former Irish politician. Daniel mentioned the digital single market. I was Minister for the Digital Single Market and European Affairs and Data Protection once in my life, but more recently I've become Vice President of Rasmussen Global. We're a consultancy set up by former NATO Secretary General Anders Fogh Rasmussen and Danish Prime Minister for 10 years. And we have currently, as one of our clients on a pro bono basis, the government of Ukraine, working with them on security guarantees. So we're very much working at the nexus of the topic we have this morning. 10 years ago, NATO recognized cyber and the cybersecurity element as being critical part of how we cooperate for our defense in Europe. And yet, now today, in a period where never before have we seen so many external threats coming towards us, particularly in the cyberspace, we also have advancing at a rapid pace technology, artificial intelligence, of course, and perhaps also a now more inward-looking policy coming from the United States. So I suppose the heavy topic for this morning is how can we work together with industry, with our governments in the West, and indeed with other alliances to try and build trust. A great pleasure to have with us this morning. I'll just give you a brief idea of the format. Our four speakers are going to give a 3 or 4 minute introductory remark, and then we'll come back. I'll come back with them with a number of questions, but then we want to open it up to the floor. So we've a great program for 2 days. But it's important at the first session that all of you guys set the tone, prepare, stick up your hand, and ask our wonderful panel some questions. We're going to have it, I think, a little bit interactive, so if you have anything to say or criticize before your time comes, please jump in. Just briefly, and they can introduce themselves in a minute, great pleasure to have Despina Spanou here again with us. This year. She will be known to all of you, but principal advisor in the Commission, to the European Commission, on cybersecurity coordination. So I think clearly the key person in our European Commission with respect to the topic we have with us this morning. Benoît, Chatelain, who's here on my left, both private government experience, but also in the private sector, which is great. And then representing the great government of Canada, Jordan Zed, who works in the Privy Council with the Canadian government. So in a way, I think you're opposite number, Despina. We had a joke earlier, myself and David, who's a cybersecurity expert from Washington, D.C., Sidley global law firm, but also here today as our American guest representing the United States. We had a bit of a joke about who gets to keep Canada in the future. We're sort of thinking you could replace the UK as the 28th member state, but some of the Americans think that... Exactly, yeah. The bar in Dublin Airport actually is called the 51st state, so we're kind of fighting with you on that one. But I'm going to kick off, if we may, with Despina, if you could give your introductory remarks, and then we'll do the same for the other three, and then we'll come with questions. Thanks, Despina.
Well, thank you very much. Bonjour. I think we're in Paris, so we need to speak a bit of French, but thank you very much for sharing your thoughts in English this year, Daniel. It shows how international this has become. You said I'm here again, as almost people are tired of me. So, but I'm very, but I'm very happy to see all of you again here, because I think this is becoming now an annual gathering that we all look forward to, together with others that take place in Europe. And I'm very proud to be here. I'm very thankful to be sharing with you, because there is a lot happening. So you wanted me to kick off with some remarks from the European Commission's perspective. I'm very honored to represent. I'm not the key person. I'm part of a team, and you will see some of my colleagues later today and tomorrow, where we are called to serve a greater purpose, especially in the current geopolitical context. I think that we are living unprecedented times when it comes to maintaining our peace, maintaining international relations, keeping our history together. Last year we were here celebrating the 80th year of D-Day. This year we're celebrating the football victory of France. We always celebrate the role of France, but France as a key partner and a key founding member of the EU sees together with all of us these unprecedented changes. And you heard our Vice President, and I think that her portfolio already gives the tone. Huh? Digital sovereignty, democracy, justice. We're talking here about values, and cybersecurity in Europe is there about protecting our values and who we are, our democracy, our economy, our people. And our president, Ursula von der Leyen, received the Chatelain Prize last weekend in Aachen, and she said that we have to develop a new Pax Europeana for the 21st century, one that is shaped and managed by Europe itself. So this is where we are in Europe. We are trying to shape our own capabilities of protecting our values, of protecting Europe, protecting the peace that we've built together, by building also our cyber resilience. And you see things happening in Europe that are kind of new. Look, for instance, attribution. We had two governments, two member states of the EU, Czechia and France, that recently attributed cyber incidents to specific actors. That's rather new, and it shows that we are going for a different approach. We are getting our act together. For years we were building our resilience, our preparedness, NIS 1, NIS 2, then of course the Cybersecurity Act, all these fantastic pieces of legislation, which are not about regulation. They are really about creating a level playing field for our actors in Europe and maintaining a high level of protection for our critical infrastructure and our economy. And we are passing now more to a talk about defense. Cyber defense has come into play. You've seen now that cybersecurity appears across the board, including in the white paper on defense that was published by the European Commission 2 months ago. So we are going to a different level, using cybersecurity for more, and responding this way to the geopolitical context. So I think before we dive into the technicalities, we need to see where Europe stands today, and I think Europe will continue to build on what it has been doing, meaning solidarity between us, but also with the like-minded. That will never stop. You know, our partners are important. We need to keep peace together. The malicious actors and those who want to damage our societies and our democracies are the same for all of us. So I think we'll continue to build on solidarity with the like-minded, not just between us, and we will continue, though, to build our operational capacity, and I think this is where the focus is now.
Excellent. That's a great kickoff. Thank you very much, and we'll come back in a minute with questions. Jordan, if you want to give your introductory remarks, please.
Good morning. Well, thank you very much for having me. Thanks to Sébastien. Thanks to all of my fellow panelists and to you for being here. It's a real pleasure to be here. I was particularly excited about the nexus of AI and cyber in this discussion, and just seeing the panels today, I think really underscores the importance of navigating that space, and happy to share with you some thoughts from a Canadian government perspective. I'll just say quickly to situate where I am within the Canadian government context. I'm in a brand new secretariat that supports the Prime Minister. It's the first time actually the Prime Minister recently elected has appointed a minister of AI as well. I think kind of underscoring the importance of this work and leadership in this space. And so within our secretariat, our role really is about trying to bring coherence to a very complex, multi-dimensional, active space across the federal family in the Government of Canada. So it's about Canadian leadership, but it's about supporting efforts around adoption, skills, literacy, labor market, but also on the safety and security pillar. And that obviously is much of the focus of today, but really the opportunity to balance and understand the connection between the economic opportunities, which are vast, but also doing that in a way that is responsible, that's thoughtful, and that obviously reflects the kind of international collaboration that's needed in this space. So very excited 6 months into the Secretariat to be advancing some of our work. The other point I think that I wanted to make, in addition to understanding, I think, in our space, the nexus between AI and cyber, is the private-public partnership, which this conference represents. We can't do this in isolation. Governments, as we all know, have a slice, but clearly can't do it without the expertise and the depth that many of you in the room and around the world in private sector can bring. So I think having these discussions and understanding the opportunities, the points of connection, the partnerships that we can build, I think is absolutely critical. So delighted to be here and looking forward to our discussion.
Thank you very much indeed, Jordan. Benoît.
Merci, Dara. So, bonjour à tous in French. So, just giving you a small point from the European tech industry. I think we must fundamentally change our strategic approach, moving from a reactive replenishment to a proactive resilience. Because, the battlefield is no longer a physical aspect. It's more hybrid, as you know. Europe is the target every day of hybrid attacks. We have to consider cyber campaigns against our critical entities and foreign information and manipulation and interference, FIMI, as you know it. That's the aim of our daily business. And this is not hypothetical future threats, but a permanent and declared conflict. What I can say is that for years, from an EU perspective, we have had instruments like EDIRPA and HAZAP for ammunition, as an example, just to focus on replenishing stockpiles. But we cannot win tomorrow's conflicts with yesterday's doctrines. This is why we are really welcoming the SAFE instrument. It has just been voted, I think, last week, something like that. Yeah. But if I may, regarding cyber, it's very interesting that the digital capabilities and technologies have been directly put in this instrument. But if we look at cyber, it has been put in category 2, if you know it, if you have noticed. Category 1, and it should have been put in category 2, meaning the design authority in Europe. And that's not the case. So it's the door open to every other countries outside Europe to buy or to sell cyber technologies. However, speaking about funding, it's only a tool, and we advocate new doctrines from an industry perspective based on 2 pillars. You know it probably, data-centric security, what's so-called DCS, and zero trust architecture, ZT, for those who know that. It's because we really think data is the aim of what we have to protect, and not, it's about the content and not about the container. We don't care basically about storing clouds and so on, because truly the technology comes from outside Europe probably, and it's nonsense to use another technology. But if we securize data, it will be more and more efficient for us. The other point, and I will stop here. The other point is really the cognitive warfare threats and FIMI, as I've told you, because we really have to develop some kind of capabilities from our European perspective to ensure our own security. That's my small words.
Thank you very much indeed, Benoît. And David, if you could give us your perspective and a little bit more.
Including the Americans. We are delighted to be back here again this year. Thank you.
It was a close call. But
Well, look, but I think we've heard a little bit on this panel already, and from some of the introductory speakers. Thank you all for focusing us on a little bit of the how. If you look at the title of our panel on how Western defense can stand in the new international order, I think the condition precedent to that discussion of how, whether it's increased regulation, lifting the bar of the lower players to provide for a more common defense, whether it's funding mechanisms that are more facile, easier from startup to production to scale, et cetera. But this question actually presupposes that we've answered the question of where are we today? That is, what is the state of Western defense? And what is the new international dynamic? And I think we should pause for a moment there. And then I'll quickly turn back to a quick response on the how, at least from the US perspective. First, Western defense today stands at a critical inflection point. We've heard that from every speaker. It is on the cover of every major newspaper. And I think those who would like to go back to the prior global order during the Cold War and the post-Cold War dynamic are making a fundamental error. It is being shaped by intensifying competition between major powers. We even see a lot of commentary about great power competition rising our Russian colleagues to a great power equivalent, along with China and the United States and Europe. We have an erosion of long-standing strategic norms, including the rule of law. We're struggling with mounting complexity of emerging domains of conflict. And to preserve the standing and effectiveness, we're trying to recalibrate our posture. What we heard from Secretary Rubio when he recently visited here in Europe, which actually caused him to pause, this was in early April, when he was meeting with the 31 allied members of NATO. He said there appears to be a lot of confusion here in Europe, and there's a lot of confusion even in the United States, in the press and among our population, about the value of NATO. And he said that the developments that we're seeing underscore the post-war security order as being actively contested in every domain. First, at land, we're seeing that in Ukraine. Second, at sea, we're seeing that particularly in the South China Sea. Third, in the air and in space, we're seeing that with the domain and the battles that are going on in cyber currently in geospatial arenas, and those of us who are working on the front lines of that can tell you firsthand that is perhaps the most scary and most disturbing and troubling types of cyber events that we're dealing with. We're also seeing it in the information space, the information dominance that the West preserved in the post-Cold War order is over. And we're seeing that time and again, and we just saw it again in Romania. And then finally, we're seeing it in cyber, the point of this gathering. Our cyber dominance has eroded. Right? We're seeing more near-peer status with our Chinese counterparts, but it is presenting a risk that we can address, and we are addressing, and many of the people in this room represent that. What do these developments mean? They underscore that the post-Cold War security order is being actively contested, as I mentioned, across each of those domains. Thank you. I want to give a quick response on the how. You know, as you mentioned, last year we were here celebrating the anniversary of D-Day, the 80th anniversary, and as I mentioned, our Secretary of State was recently here for NATO. Look, NATO remains the bedrock of European security. Secretary Rubio made very clear that the United States and the President of the United States remain committed to NATO and its success. However, it must evolve beyond a reactive defense model. And that means that the types of initiatives on the hows that we're talking about on this panel and throughout the next 2 days, and the remarks that you made, are so essential to ensuring that our European partners can rise to this occasion, build the technology capabilities to defend Europe both at land, at sea, in space, in the information space, and in the cyber domain. The chief risk that the United States has identified as our chief contest is in China. And what Rubio has stated, and what the President of the United States currently has stated, is that we need our European partners, through NATO and otherwise, to step up and maintain order in this region with a rule of law, with a norm setting, in order to allow us to focus on the main thing. T. Boone Pickens, an old Texan, had a great line. He passed away a couple years ago. He said, "The main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing." And right now, in terms of what the new international dynamic is for Western defense from a US perspective, the main thing is China, and the main thing is ensuring that Europe is strong, prosperous, free, democratic, and can confront risks in this region with our support behind you, with you leading.
Thank you very much, David, and thanks to all of you. You framed our conversation very, very nicely. I'm going to come first to you, Despina, if I may. So, with great success, I think it's fair to say the European Union has established itself as a global leader in terms of digital regulation, the Cybersecurity Act, Cyber Resilience Act, NIS 1 and 2, and so on and so forth. And clearly essential that we enforce now our own rules and regulations and laws. But how do we balance that with maintaining strong cooperation with our partners in the West, and indeed with industry and all of those who share this common role of keeping all the world safe, but particularly led by Western allies and partners?
Well, I will not repeat my opening remarks, which were more or less replying to what you said, but I do not think that we should talk about us being a champion of digital regulation. Personally, it bothers me. Regulation is simply the way we do things in Europe so that we maintain the same standards across 27 countries, and a level playing field for the industry and the stakeholders. Otherwise, it wouldn't work. So it's not like we like championing regulation. Do not forget that the cybersecurity legislation is based on a legal basis that is about the internal market. So it's an internal market, commercial, industrial kind of legal basis. That's how it started. Given the geopolitical context, it evolved further. The Cyber Solidarity Act is a great example of that because it goes into the operational aspects, sharing information, creating cooperation centers of security that share threat intelligence, creating the cyber reserve. So I think that we try to keep together an ecosystem of cybersecurity rules that indeed now need to be implemented. I would not say necessarily enforce only. It's about, we are still at the level of implementation. And the one call I would have for this gathering is that it is in fact everyone's responsibility to implement these rules. Because there is a system by which everybody is waiting for the governments to make European rules law internally at national level, and then the industry starts looking at how to implement it, and then the government starts enforcing. If we wait for that in the area of cybersecurity, the accident that is waiting to happen will happen. The jewel of the crown of the European ecosystem of cyber laws, you would expect me to say it's a Cybersecurity Act, but it's actually an NIS, protecting our critical infrastructures in the largest scope that we included in NIS 2, that includes particular industries, individual industries that are critical for our society, the public administration. So we went really far beyond the traditional scope of critical infrastructures. And unless the stakeholders, the industry itself, starts implementing it on their own, as I said, the accident will happen. And it will be too late to look at which government adopted which law and whether they're enforcing it properly. This will be irrelevant. So the one call that we will be making and that we will try to do whilst we're working with governments to help them implement the rules is that the industry, the operators, have to come forward themselves and implement the rules. The same stands for the Cyber Resilience Act that will create a different landscape of security by design for every product that reaches our consumers, our businesses, and the stakeholders keep telling us it's a burden, postpone, postpone, until the day you have a big cyber attack through the Internet of Things, through connected products, and then everybody will be running to say, why did it happen? What can we do? Well, it's there, what we can do. So I think that the industry, and we are there, and personally that is what I apply also with my team. We are there to talk with the industry, with the stakeholders, and help them with the implementing rules, even adapt. You know that we have launched a great exercise of simplification, and there will be an omnibus by the end of the year in the digital sphere. So we hear you, we hear everyone, we hear the governments, we hear the stakeholders, the industry, and we will simplify the rules. But in the meantime, we are there to accompany the industry to implement the rules. I think we need to speak of implementation before enforcement. It's not about carrot and stick. We all need to apply responsibility. So for me, this is the biggest stake right now. If we want to talk about a Europe of defense, a Europe that will apply, you know, we recently adopted in Europe the cyber blueprint, so it's a revised version of our handbook of who does what in case of a great cyber incident. The role of everyone there is critical, but we shouldn't get there. We shouldn't get to the, I mean, we shouldn't be proud that we have it, because the whole point is to be resilient and prepared and not to have to use it. And this is what we have done so far. So I think this is the biggest stake right now, and where all that operate in Europe, at least, where we can help, should help and should come forward with responsibility that belongs to everyone. The Cyber Solidarity Act will give everyone the means, because we already have the first two cyber hubs that are being created. So imagine that. Cross-border collaboration between governments and authorities that share intelligence, threat intelligence. That's a first. But that is going to help everyone. And it's the same with the cyber reserve. Imagine private individuals that will get certified and will be on the reserve list to be called to help in case of cyber incidents. So we're providing the means to everyone, and we will help, but the responsibility is shared.
Okay, thank you very much. Implementation before enforcement. Following on from what Despina said, I think it's fair to say, Jordan, though, that there have been ongoing discussions in formats such as OECD, G7, about how we do try and move towards common approaches to cybersecurity and artificial intelligence. Canada does sit in a very interesting place now in this intersection between North American security and transatlantic security. And with the presidency of the G7 as well. And I think it's fair to say, even within our own AI office, there is a strong transatlantic Euro-Canadian partnership, many Canadians, I believe, working there. How can, or do you believe that Canada can and should act as a bridge between perhaps Brussels and Washington, or greater improve relations between Canada and Europe, or Canada and the United States?
Thank you. So a few thoughts on this. I think partially in our DNA is this bridge building notion, in part because of geography, the fact that we are where we are in North America, and our history, obviously founded and derived from our founding countries, France and the UK. I think there's always a desire to understand and connect the dots between where we are and how we've become who we are as a people. So I think there is an innate desire and interest in doing that. And I think that what I wanted to focus on are a few concrete things that we can continue to do, that we can bolster even as we're facing this moment of volatility and uncertainty, that I think we can anchor ourselves on. First of all, I think there's huge opportunity to continue to build together. Our Prime Minister in his first national address said, I want to join Europe's defense efforts. that have been announced. So it's a very explicit, very clear desire to bolster those points of connection in a defense and security context. The second thing is, I think there are institutions where sometimes the work continues below the surface, and that's okay. That's a very good thing in many contexts. The Safety Institute networks in an AI context, I think, are doing really important work. It's steady, it's thoughtful, it's about model evaluation, it's about understanding synthetic content, it's about doing joint exercises. That's really important stuff in terms of understanding how AI is working, for example. That's important to continue to bolster and to ensure essentially that we're able to advance the science of safety in that context. So that's critical. The other piece, kind of in a defense context, that I want to underscore are institutions like DIANA, for those who might know, Defense Innovation Accelerator for the North Atlantic. There's a regional office in Halifax, Nova Scotia that we recently announced, but essentially what it focuses on is innovation capacity building. And I think what's fascinating about it is it does connect public and private sector interests. There have been already around and a process that have identified a number of organizations to receive funding, essentially to build their capacity in the context of innovation. It's not insignificant because it really focuses on the concrete work on a daily basis of bolstering our innovation ecosystems across NATO. There are important opportunities to connect the dots through the capacity across the alliance, for example, that I think we can continue to avail ourselves of and accelerate. The other piece, as you mentioned, is the G7. And I will say the G7 has, for those who have been following it, really focused, yes, among the G7 membership, but beyond that membership with partners from around the world. And I think there is an opportunity this year with Canada as the president to really examine where there's opportunities for greater collaboration. For example, in the AI context, we're looking at 4 areas in particular to advance. So AI for growth, which is about sharing use cases, talent exchanges, working together on governance. So the safety piece, I think, will be important, safety and security in that context. AI for everyone, for example, the notion that the opportunities must not be limited to the few, but extended to as many as possible within our societies. AI and energy, very important piece about fueling the needs, but also optimizing our efforts in that context, and AI in government. So these are specific examples in which we can anchor the work that we're pursuing, that we can make the important points of connection between the opportunities, but also the safety, because without public trust, clearly these opportunities cannot be fully seized. So to the extent that we can understand the communities, the citizens that we serve better and build those points of connection in the security and defense context, including in NATO, I think we'll all be better served.
Look, just a quick comment. So I think what we've seen in the last 3 years in particular is that the idea of having a technology edge in order to provide for a common defense in the West is now a principle that is adhered to and understood by all of us. Whether that is functioned through a NATO framework and the NATO model on an individual state level, through the European Commission undertakings, through bilateral or multilateral initiatives, all of those play important roles in that technology edge development and technology sharing in order to create the edge. There are also people in this room that are involved in the ECVC markets, the private equity markets, to drive capital into that space, which the United States has had the significant benefit of much more open markets and free capital for many years: Silicon Valley, Boston, Austin, Chicago, New York, the market outside of Washington, for example. You are focusing on that. I think what we've learned from Despina and her colleagues over the last 3 years here in Europe, particularly the Commission's efforts, we heard the numbers this morning here in France of what that market looks like. And that report is a fantastic report of giving the state of play here. commend you on that. I do think that Despina's point is something that we quickly skip over. We look at it from an enforcement perspective, and we think about the rule of law and the norm standards that are getting set. We focus on the risks attendant to these standards, and not as much on what you rightfully pointed out, which is the market-making activity that you're engaging in. Technology edge for democracies in the West as a defensive model requires that that technology edge be resilient. It must be a resilient technology edge, not merely a technology edge. Whether we get there by voluntary mechanisms, which has driven our markets for the last 20 years in cyber or more, for Spanou, I think you'd probably say for the last 40 years. And you're right, and you've worked diligently with others in this room for many years to try to establish norms to get us out of just a voluntary model. But Despina's point is, we can't have fit-for-purpose, resilient technology edge as a defensive measure unless we force market mechanisms. I appreciate very much as a lawyer on the defensive side that we're not going to go straight into enforcement. Thank you for that. But we do need time. There's a time horizon here. But I do think we should focus very carefully on what those definitions are on resilient technology edge plays. And right now we have non-harmonized legal regimes around that. And it is challenging for many of the companies in this room and around the world to try to harmonize and frankly homogenize. I think what we typically find is that we're engaging in global regulatory arbitrage. You know, this is what's happening in Europe with respect to NIS2, this is what the US standard is, this is what the bulk transfer rules out of China are, and as a multinational, how do I conduct arbitrage across those? That is not a very winning model if what we're looking for is resilient technology edge for defensive Western principles.
Thank you very much. And actually on that, I think we've the perfect person who might be able to answer. I mean, Despina, you mentioned the importance of implementation for industry. But Benoît, you represent the industry here in this panel this morning. I mean, what are the practical challenges that you face in implementing and following on from the point that David just made?
You know, regarding the regulation, for us, finally, it's a strategic opportunity. Could be tricky to say it this way, but we see that as an opportunity. If you remember well, last year, the EUCS I+ episode that is coming back this year. That's a never-ending story, but I think it's a good story. If we deal with regulations, it's a good way for us, at least in Europe, to facilitate cross-border cooperations. It's a way to design together how we can cooperate, even if we use other foreign technologies. But truly speaking, what we really need is to go further. As Despina said, the cybersecurity regulation will benefit from a simplification. Finally, the main problem for us is the incident reporting obligation to reduce administrative burdens and foster compliance. That's the real problem for us because it takes time always. And it's difficult to be reactive and proactive regarding these aspects. Secondly, our resilience depends on, I hate this word, but technological sovereignty. I would say behind sovereignty, it's quite old-fashioned, I think, in English, but we are speaking about strategic autonomy. And if we speak about strategic autonomy, the most important thing for us is, as I've told you before, the data, not about the cloud or containers. So if we deal with that, we really have to implement new kind of regulation like EUCS, and when I'm speaking about EUCS, I'm speaking about I+. Not using foreign technologies, but maintain our capabilities, our sovereign capabilities within Europe. I'm speaking about Europe, not only global Western, but I think we can cooperate together, having as an example, US technologies, but it could be for another point of view. But it's for us the insurance to have European sovereign providers. As you may have noticed, some new companies have been launched using US technologies and providing a sovereign capability. I think this is the way we have to develop our approach. As in France, we use Secnum Cloud. That's kind of technology we can develop all over Europe, by regulations at least. And just to finish about SAFE, you know, have this in mind. I think it shouldn't be used only into hardware technologies, but also on software to have more and more capabilities on data architectures and secure by design digital services. This is quite important for us because if we don't have this European preference, we won't be able to develop our own capabilities, because the easiest way to do our business is to buy on the shelves. So we will buy US technologies. This is what we do, but it's not possible anymore. Not because US technologies are not good, but because I've heard so much times in my life that why should you redevelop new kind of technologies as it already exists? But for our own sovereignty, that's great. That's quite important to do, even if it costs a bit more today.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm wondering, has anybody any questions they'd like to put to our panel this morning? Yes, please, if you wouldn't mind just identifying yourself as well. They have microphones that they'll bring in. Just your name and from where you come, who you represent, please. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Mike Bingle. I work for NATO as a cyber warrior, and I have a question for David. You said we should go beyond defensive capabilities, right? When you talk to I'm an active soldier as well. When we talk about going beyond defensive capability and working together with US Cybercom, you know, those things are now just for the nations to do, not for NATO. But this is a public-private, you know, a framework. So I want to ask you, could you elaborate and be more precise what you mean that we should go beyond our defensive capabilities? Of course, you mean defensive cyber capabilities, right? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Good to see you. I think what I'm referring to is this reactive posture that NATO has had in this context, as well as many of us in this space, is evolving. And proactive cyber capabilities, that forward presence capability that has been significantly informed by and documented in our national cybersecurity strategy in the United States and our national security strategy, involves a forward presence and a forward capability, one that has existed for a long time, as you are well aware, and enhancing that capability so that we're not just reactive. We also, as you are very familiar, are dealing with an initiative including draft legislation in the United States that was proposed going back now to 2019, even earlier legislation, but has been revived and is currently being debated in the White House within our cybersecurity community in the United States and with our colleagues here in Europe about proactive defense, meaning proactive offense, and I know that's what you're referring to. That debate is continuing. Part of having a sustainable defensive model, it goes back to one of our colleagues from the NSA's statement many years ago to Congress about people who live in the glass house. A cyber glass house should not be throwing cyber stones, or should at least be very cautious in the way one does that. That is obviously in full debate right now, and many of us are working on papers, the legislation, with the sponsors, including a sponsor in the White House around that. That debate's going to continue. Europe obviously has voiced its position around those topics and is continuing to voice that. It's very important that we as a collective have a collective and a dynamic discussion around that. And I'll leave it there, but I think you're exactly right. I'm concerned, having spent a lot of time dealing with Ukraine and pre-Ukraine conflict truly beginning, about the idea of starting to throw cyber stones from the private sector to the private sector or from the private sector to the government.
Yes, please.
I agree with you, especially on a personal note. But as a NATO officer, and including our U.S. Supreme Commander, we have to be aware that NATO exists of nations, not only the new nations like Finland and Sweden, but also nations on the eastern side of Europe, and we all have to agree. We all. So that's one of the issues we have that we have to discuss, agree. And then we can move forward. And that's one of the things of democracy, you know, sometimes it holds you back. But thank you for your comment.
No, and I think the second, third, fourth order effects of that are part of that dialogue. We saw that after NotPetya in 2017. I think those of us that handled those matters, you recall what NATO's important role in that was, and then in terms of defining what that event was and was not. The system, for example, is currently built to assume certain amounts of risk through an absorption model, economically through contracts and through insurance frames. If we engage in effectively hacking back activity at the private sector level with nation states, where we have the Lloyds of the world coming out with statements saying we are not going to put that on our insurance package up the stack, you are doing that at your own peril. So I think you're exactly right to caution that this needs to be a collaborative undertaking with a lot of discussion, with serious consideration of second, third, and fourth order effects.
Okay, I'm going to give you all a minute to wrap up, and if you could touch on where you see the Trump administration headed with respect to global in a minute, but we have another question, and I have a question for Despina as well myself. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Allie King, VP of Government Affairs at Forescout. We're a cybersecurity company. We do quite a bit of work here in the European Union, so appreciate your candid and thoughtful comments today. As we circle back on the discussion around resilience, I hear a lot about the tools that are necessary, the policy that will help you systematically reduce risk, but I would hope that I can understand a little bit more your goals and understanding of how you're going to address the workforce issue. And so specifically, this is the 15th anniversary of Stuxnet, so we do know that you can cross that Rubicon from digital to physical with some significant consequences attached to it. Curious to better understand specifically around the OT critical infrastructure space, how you're ensuring both digital defenders, but also the industrial engineers that are essential to ensure that we have access to the critical sectors that support modern life can continue to move forward in this dynamic space. Thanks.
A skills question. Yeah, it's one of my favorite subjects. Not for good reasons, because indeed we have serious issues. And you know that we are trying in Europe because we're facing the same challenges everywhere in the world. We are short of hundreds of thousands of jobs. In the traditional sectors of cybersecurity, we're lacking people who understand protection of security systems, but also from other fields, dealing with cybercrime, dealing with current threats. So we're doing a few things. I think the first thing is the academy we set up for cybersecurity skills, which is a collaborative system. It's a house for all the efforts that can be made to bring more people into cybersecurity, starting from the education level. Actually, our vice president is going to launch a collaboration with the of industry and academia in a couple of weeks in Europe. That will be part of this academy. We have all the major companies that have come forward with pledges to certify people, educate people, train them, upskill professionals, reskill professionals. So we ask them to put forward pledges that can be measurable, because we know that people get trained, but we don't see them entering the market. And we need to make this job appealing. Last year I spoke to tens of young people who participated in the International Championship of Cybersecurity, who are all very young students who love hacking, and I asked how many of them would enter the market afterwards. It was 1 in 10, and hardly, because they do not find it interesting. They do not find it appealing. They have issues with the law. So we need to hear that out as well and try to encourage them. Now, we also have other opportunities. We keep talking about the opportunities of AI. And I think when we talk about using AI also to protect our systems, we also need to use AI for those jobs where it can respond to our needs. And I think we are actually in the EU putting action to our words by providing specific funding programs for this kind of opportunities. So using AI to fill in certain types of tasks, of course, with the relevant oversight always in mind. So we are working on that. I think we're taking this very seriously since the establishment of the Academy. But the Academy is, again, a collaborative effort, so we need people to come forward with responsible pledges so that we can entice professionals to stay, because that's also a challenge. The burnout of CISOs and all that, we are all aware of this. So we need to maintain the people who are in the job, to upskill them, but also bring further people.
And just to follow up on that, I mean, you mentioned the real importance of critical infrastructure, and Benoît mentioned technology, and you're speaking about having a very broad approach to looking at what critical infrastructure is. Do you see at all a tension between Europe first, Europe digital sovereignty, European clouds, and then working with the United States and United States industry in particular, whether it is services, hardware, data centers? Is there a tension there? Is there a conflict there? How do you square that circle, so to speak?
I don't see a tension personally, and I don't think there should be tension. Everybody does what they know how to do best. We have certain parts of the industry we have excellence in Europe. There are certain parts of the tech industry that have excellence in the US. We need to make it work together, but I think everybody also has to work for their own sovereignty, and this is what Europe is trying through our industrial programs, through certain specific actions like our CHIPS Act and CHIPS Act 2.0. I think it is fair and square that everybody also takes care of their industrial capabilities and defense capabilities. But at the same time, we need to work together. Now, there shouldn't be tension, but at the same time, there should be clear definition of certain issues. And I think in the upcoming Cybersecurity Act, and I'm like a saleswoman here, I need to sell the Cybersecurity Act. The public consultation is on until the 20th of June. My colleague Christiane, who is there, would not forgive me if I didn't mention that, and she will repeat it at her panel. There we intend to deal, and this is the opportunity to discuss that with our stakeholders, with supply chain issues. And I think this is where we need to decide where the limits are, to protect everybody's sovereignty and interests.
Excellent stuff. Thank you very much. I'm going to give you all, we're at the end of our time. I see Sebastian hovering at the door, saying you're now at time. But I will give you all 1 minute if you've anything to wrap up on. Maybe if you wouldn't mind addressing, we won't call it the elephant in the room, but nonetheless, it would probably appropriate enough to refer to Donald Trump as some form of a large mammal.
Let's talk about the AI Act and CRA. Look, I think...
Or the DSA.
Maybe we'll do it this way, right? Yeah, the DSA, my favorite. The encryption that Trump has is fairly stiff. Decrypting him, do I have a hybrid chip that allows us to do that today? No, I don't think any of us do. But the intention, I think, is becoming clear, if not clear to some already. As I mentioned, there was a lot of confusion around NATO, and I think we need to be careful and read the words. Secretary Rubio, a serious player in international order, in the intelligence community for many years, as the chair of the Intelligence Committee in the Senate, now sitting as our Secretary of State, as well as our National Security Advisor, has made clear about the bedrock principles behind NATO. There's a lot of lack of clarity in other areas, and in certain areas there's a lack of, there is very, very clear intention. If I liken it to many of us in the room come from that world of intelligence and the defense sector, and going back to your panel's title, commander's intent, right? If one is a combatant commander in a domain, whether it's the Indo-Pacific, here in Europe, NATO, our colleagues at NATO, what one is always trying to do as below that 4-star is discern commander's intent. It can be challenging with any president, any occupant of our White House. I've lived in Washington now for almost 30 years, and I've watched the moving trucks come and go many times. We've had many presidents during my tenure there. What we all can be certain of is that the moving trucks will come again, and that is the way democracy in America works, and I'm confident in that, and I think we as Americans are confident in that. And during this time, there's going to be dramatic change, and I think discerning intent is really going to be the key. What is the commander's intent? How is that being portrayed? How is that being operationalized? But the reliance of the United States on our important partnerships here in France, our important partnerships throughout Europe, should not be questioned. I think we've been very clear about that. How that manifests through technology sharing, through funding arrangements, et cetera, and where our focus is in fact the question, but we should not doubt the importance of this alliance. France being our oldest ally, Europe being our most important ally.
Excellent. Positive note. Thank you for that. Jordan?
Great, thank you. So I was thinking just about what I could leave you with. 3 key points that are more forward-looking in nature. One is just about the practical tools, the institutions that are doing important work to allow that to continue to bolster it where we can. There's one that I didn't mention, which is the rapid response mechanism, which was started some years ago, and I think there's real opportunity to bolster it, to analyze and provide information sharing around disinformation. So in the context of building public trust and of confronting and countering where there are significant erosions or attempts to erode democratic institutions, I think there's an opportunity to do a lot more in that context, and it can really be an important part of Western collaboration in the face of threats from certain actors, and we can even leverage AI tools in that context. That's a positive thing that we can do. The second is, I think if we're being frank in the context of where governments fit, we need to seek to accelerate our policy development cycles and opportunities to amend in order to keep pace with changes in cyber and AI context. That's a perpetual challenge, which is how do we accelerate our cycles? What can we be doing better, faster together? So looking at that in our own domestic context is one thing that we're spending quite a bit of time on. And then the third thing is there are ways in which we can look to do more in terms of tabletop exercises, sharing common data sets, for example, to tackle some of the biggest problems. There are ways that we can build that experience, understand our own instincts better, and be better prepared for the worst of what we know might be possible. So I'd leave you with those 3 points. Thanks so much.
Thanks very much. A very quick final word from Benoît.
Yes, a very small word, hope. I'd just like to give you hope because there is no fatality, especially in cyber and digital area. We have been able to develop our own capabilities where other people told us it was impossible. So, as we say in French, impossible n'est pas français.
Okay, Despina, you've had a positive word from Benoît, positive sense from our American and Canadians. I think you have everything you need to go back to the Berlaymont. Perfect. Okay, well, I'd like to thank our panelists for being here with us this morning. They've done a fantastic job to start off the Paris Cyber Summit. And it's been a pleasure. I don't know, is there a break for coffee or do we jump straight to the next panel? But someone will say, yeah, we're breaking for a few minutes. So thank you very much.
Good to see you.